No sooner did the Planned Parenthood shootings take place that people were speaking about, quote, Christian terrorism and saying, look, Christianity is just as dangerous as Islam and we need to renounce it. Of course, I utterly renounce the horrific Planned Parenthood shootings as every person of conscience would, and of course every pro-life person would and true follower of Jesus would. But I want to contrast for a moment radical Islam with radical Christianity. In the Quran, you have clear statements about killing your enemies, fighting against unbelievers, about smiting them at the neck, crucifying them, chopping off right hand, left foot, or the alternate. You have texts like that in the Quran. You have nothing like that in the teaching of Jesus or the New Testament. The Old Testament texts about Israel killing enemies were for a certain point in time and no relevance for later culture. And clearly, the spirit of Jesus is put down your sword, take up your cross. So, number one, you have support for these radical murderous actions in the Quran. You have zero support in the New Testament. Now let's think of Muhammad. He was first a spiritual leader, then a political leader, then a military leader. Jesus was only a spiritual leader, never a political leader, never a military leader. Muhammad not only fought in battle, but in one notorious case, beheaded more than 600 Jewish captives. These were men who had surrendered, young men who had surrendered. He beheaded them either personally or with help of others, beheaded them. Jesus went to the cross and died. And Muhammad was a fighter. Muhammad was a military leader. Jesus told his disciples, don't fight for me. I'm going to the cross. That's my destiny. Now, the followers of Muhammad, what did they do? They advanced Islam with the sword, conquering city after city and country after country in the first 100 years. What did the immediate disciples of Jesus do? They spread the gospel and were killed and crucified for doing that. Now, as we look through Islamic history, we see often Islam has grown by the sword. We see often Islam has advanced by the sword. We see in the last century of the so-called golden age of Islam that Christianity was almost completely eradicated from the Middle East and Northern Africa by the sword of Islam. We're talking about around the 13th century, whereas you have to go fully 1,000 years after the time of Jesus to find something like the Crusades. And even then, that was to take back land that had been taken by Muslims, and it was more of a military affair than anything. But even then, that remains aberrant in our history. And you don't have anything like that for 1,000 years, and then you don't have anything like that in a church-wide way following in the centuries after the Crusades. And then, not only that, you have teaching from major contemporary Islamic leaders, devout Muslims who lead these various terrorist groups and who fuel the fires on a national level of this radical Islamic ideology, teaching after teaching after teaching that justifies these things, whereas you have no major recognized Christian leaders who are calling for Christians to advance their faith by way of the sword and go around killing the unbelievers. We're not talking about a war where your country's invaded by some other country and you're fighting back. We're not talking about a home invasion where you're defending yourself. We're talking about followers of Jesus going out and expanding their faith, spreading their faith by killing other people. It does not exist. So here it is in short. Radical Islam says, deny Jesus as Son of God and Lord, or we will kill you. Radical Christianity says, you can kill us, but we won't deny Jesus as Lord. So, to try to make Christian radical teaching anything other than the radical following of Jesus is to completely misrepresent the Savior and the cross.